Welcome to our Era of Isolationism review video. As we talked about at the beginning of class today, our goals for today's lesson is for you to be able to define isolationism, explain why we adopted an isolationist policy, and identify and explain the ways the United States attempted to end warfare and maintain international peace. Those ways being the Washington Naval Conference, Kellogg-Briand Pact, and the Dawes Plan. So I'm going to review this really important information and add some more details and go into further depth beyond what the textbook provided you. So to start off, we have our very important definition to understand this entire era. So isolationism is a government policy of not taking part in economic and political alliances or relations with other countries. So you should have just watched the New York Times video about the history of isolationism in the United States. So you'll see that this policy is not isolated. See what I did there? Isolated to just the 20s, but it will be adopted again and again in the future that we'll talk about once we get to topics like the Vietnam and Korean War. So the Washington Naval Conference was a huge starting point to this policy, and the Washington Conference, let me just start by giving you like an overall definition. So in 1921, it was an international conference that held representatives from the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Japan, and it was hosted in, crazy guess here, Washington, D.C., to discuss naval disarmament and resulted in agreements to discuss power conflicts in the Pacific, to reduce or limit the size of each nation's navy, to regulate submarine use, and to ban poison gas use. So that's the definition that you'll find in the textbook as well as on our Quizlet set. There are three specific treaties that came out of the Washington Naval Conference. First, there's the Five-Power Treaty. This was between the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, France, and Italy. And this was all about disarmament. So they established a certain ratio of warships to kind of limit how many each nation could possess. It allowed the United States and the United Kingdom to have the most warships and the largest navies because both countries had navies in the Pacific and the Atlantic. And so this treaty called on all five of these countries to stop building capital ships and reduce the size of navies by scrapping their older ships. The Four-Power Treaty also came out of this conference. It was between the U.S., France, the United Kingdom, and Japan. They agreed to consult with each other in the event of a future crisis in East Asia, because after World War I, the United States saw Japan as a rising military threat, because they felt that Japan, as they were modernizing, they threatened the United States colonies. And so this treaty ensured that none would be obligated to engage in a conflict, none of these four powers, if it happened in East Asia. So they now also had a mechanism for discussion if a conflict emerged in this area of the world. Then we have the Nine-Power Treaty that was between the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, France, and Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Portugal, and China. And so this was essentially an internationalization of the United States' open door policy in China that we learned about during our imperialism unit. This treaty stated that all 9 of these signatories, those 9 countries I stated, would respect the territorial integrity of China. So all of these treaties signed at the Washington Naval Conference served to uphold the status quo in the Pacific. They recognized that there were existing interests and didn't make any fundamental changes to them. Yet the United States secured agreements that reinforced its existing policy in the Pacific, such as the open door policy in China, as well as protecting their colony of the Philippines, while limiting the imperial power and expansion of Japan. So next we need to talk about the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And this was an agreement made among most nations of the world in 1828 to try to settle international disputes by peaceful means rather than war. So this was signed in Paris. It was essentially an agreement to outlaw war. Initially, France, the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Belgium, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Germany, Italy, and Japan all signed this pact. Later, an additional 47 nations followed suit and also signed it, so the pact was eventually signed by most of the established nations in the entire world. The U.S. Senate agreed to ratify the agreement by a vote of 85 to 1, although it did so only after making reservations to note that U.S. participation did not limit its right to self defense or require it to act against signatories breaking the agreement. All right, our last very important point to review of this era is the Dawes Plan. So, the Dawes Plan was developed by banker Charles Dawes, and it was a plan for Germany to pay reparations after World War I by receiving loans from the United States. So the United States didn't necessarily want to collect reparations from Germany. They didn't have much interest in it. So it was determined to secure repayment of the more than $10 billion it had loaned to the Allies over the course of the war. So Washington rejected calls to cancel these debts in the name of common wartime cause. They wanted to collect what they had loaned. So the United States also resisted efforts to link reparations to inter-Allied war debts. So in 1922, London made this link explicit in what was called the Balfour Note. The Balfour Note said that it would seek reparations and wartime debt repayments from its European allies equal to its debt to the United States. So that same year, Congress created the United States War Debt Commission to negotiate repayment plans on certain terms with the 17 countries that had borrowed money from the United States. So the Dawes Plan works like this graphic here. So the United States would give $2.5 billion in loans to Germany. So Germany could then pay the $2 billion that it owed to the Allied powers in reparation payments, and then the Allies would make their war debt payments of $2.6 billion back to the United States. So this was the United States' proposal essentially to collect the debt that they had loaned and also to facilitate Germany's reparation payments. So that's our summary of today's very important points. Feel free to ask me in class any questions that you have, and thanks for watching.